Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Tuesday Talks. My name is Mariah Kemper, and today Molly Polzine and I will be the speakers for this presentation on creditable and non-creditable foods, Part 2, about meat alternates, and grains. In September, we presented creditable and non-creditable foods, Part 1, on milk, fruits, and vegetables. So if you missed that Tuesday Talks, you can watch the recording that is posted on the Tuesday Talks website. So today we want you to walk away with knowing how to identify creditable, non-creditable foods and about other available resources we have to help you serve creditable foods. So now let's go through these points in more detail. So today's presentation is going to go over a resource called the Creditable and Non-Creditable Foods Guide. This guide includes specific information on each meal component and includes lists of creditable and non-creditable foods. But please keep in mind this guide is not an all-inclusive list. Contact your consultant if you need help determining if a food is creditable in the CACFP, and home providers, please contact your home sponsors. The link to this guide is also in the chat box. We recommend that you print a copy and give it to your menu planners and cooks so they can reference it when needed. So let's start with the first page of the guide and define what creditable and non-creditable foods are. Creditable foods can be served as a component to meet CACFP meal pattern requirements in meals and snacks. To claim a meal for reimbursement, all food components served must be creditable. In each meal component section of the guide, creditable foods are listed in the green box. Non-creditable foods do not contribute towards meeting meal component requirements. If served, they must be served as extra foods. However, keep in mind, if you serve non-creditable foods as extras at meals, this increases food costs and adds excess calories to the meal you are serving. In addition, non-creditable foods are an unallowable cost and cannot be paid for with CACFP reimbursement. So you must use other program funding to pay for these foods. In each meal component section of the guide, non-creditable foods are listed in a blue box. So today's presentation will highlight some specific food items from each of these boxes for the meat alternate and grain components. Okay, so let's get started with the meat alternate component. We're going to go over a few points from the top of the meat alternate page of the guide first. So yogurt credits as a meat alternate in the CACFP, and for yogurt to be creditable, it must meet the sugar limit of containing no more than 23 grams of sugar per 6 ounces. So to determine this, you will compare the serving size and amount of sugar on the nutrition facts label of yogurt to the sugar limits chart that we have available in the CACFP reference guide. And this will help you to determine if the yogurt is creditable. So the next 2 points were discussed in last Tuesday's Talks webinar, so we'll briefly cover them again today. And that is that cooked dry beans and peas or legumes such as pinto, kidney, or black beans can credit as a meat alternate or as a vegetable in the CACFP, but not as both components in the same meal. However, if you are serving 2 different types of beans or peas, one may credit as a meat alternate and the other may credit as a vegetable. Another meat alternate to serve as a vegetarian option is pasta made of 100% bean or legume flour. These types of pastas may credit as a meat alternate or vegetable, but not as both in the same meal. A half a cup of cooked pasta credits as 2 ounces of meat alternate. However, to credit as a meat alternate, the pasta must be served with another 0.25 ounces of visible meat or meat alternate. So one idea to keep the dish vegetarian is that you could add beans or cheese to this pasta. So next, let's look at the creditable meat alternate section. So as you can see, there are a lot of different types of creditable meats and meat alternates to choose from. Some creditable items are tree nuts, peanuts, soy nuts, and seeds, as well as their butters. For example, nut butters including almond, cashew, and peanut, soy nut butter, sesame seed, and sunflower seed butters. Surimi seafood is a pasteurized, ready-to-eat, restructured seafood, usually made from pollock. Surimi does not require additional preparation and can be incorporated into a variety of menu items, such as seafood salads, sandwiches, and tacos. And the serving size information is listed on the CACP meal pattern chart. Right. Another meat alternate option is tempeh. And tempeh is a fermented soybean cake made from whole soybeans or other beans and legumes and grains. And 1 ounce of tempeh credits as 1 ounce of meat alternate when the tempeh is made with ingredients that are limited to soybeans, other legumes, water, tempeh culture, vinegar, seasonings, and herbs. However, if the tempeh includes other foods as ingredients such as brown rice, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, flax seeds, or other vegetables, a product formulation statement or CN label must be obtained to credit the tempeh. So tempeh provides a vegetarian option that can be used in recipes including stir fries, sandwiches, and salads. Now let's point out some non-creditable meats and meat alternates. Liquid egg substitutes, egg yolks, and egg whites alone are not whole eggs and so are therefore not creditable. Only whole eggs, including whole liquid eggs, are creditable. Yogurt products such as frozen yogurt, drinkable yogurt such as Danimals, yogurt bars, and yogurt-covered fruit or nuts are not creditable because they do not meet the definition of yogurt. Peanut and nut butter spreads are not creditable. So spreads are not the same as peanut butter or nut butter. The keyword is spread. Peanut and nut butter spreads do not have a standard of identity and are not formulated the same as a nut butter. And because of this, they are not creditable as a meat alternate. So when purchasing nut butters, be sure to read the label and verify you are purchasing a nut or peanut butter and not a nut or peanut spread. There are many common brands selling products labeled as spreads and are marketed as a healthier option by saying the spread is natural. And last, Nutella is an item that has become more popular in recent years, and as delicious as it does not credit to the meal pattern. Nutella is a hazelnut spread, not a nut butter, and sugar is actually its first ingredient. So next, let's talk about cheese. So we get this question a lot. What types of cheeses are considered a creditable meat alternate? So to help answer that question, the DPI has a handout for creditable and non-creditable cheeses that includes pictures of different types of cheese. So on this slide are the creditable cheeses. Creditable cheeses include those labeled as natural cheese and pasteurized processed cheese. These are 100% cheese. Creditable cheeses also include cottage cheese, cheese food, cheese spread, and ricotta cheese. But for these types of cheeses, 2 ounces must be served to credit as 1 ounce of meat alternate. And this slide shows non-creditable cheeses. So non-creditable cheese includes cheese labeled as imitation cheese product, such as Velveeta, cream cheese, and powdered cheese. And many of the individually wrapped cheese slices, like the American cheese singles, are not creditable because they are labeled as a cheese product. So it is very important to check the packages of cheese to see how they are labeled. And lastly, cheese sauces are not creditable unless they have a CN label or product formulation statement on file. Most cheese sauces are made primarily of oil and water. So now I'm going to turn it over to Molly to talk about a few more meat alternates and then grains.
Thanks, Mariah. So now we're going to move to the next meat and meat alternate, which is the store-bought combination foods and processed meats. So both require that a child nutrition label or a product formulation statement is on file to credit these foods. So we're going to talk about more of these requirements. So on the screen is a list of store-bought combination foods. And a combination food is a food item that contains 2 or more food components, for example, meat, grain, or vegetable. And some common examples are breaded items like chicken nuggets, patties, or strips, or fish sticks because they contain breading, which can count as the grain component, and then chicken or fish, which is the meat component. So some other combination items that may not be as obvious are meatballs, meatloaf, and Salisbury steak. So these are considered combination foods because they contain other ingredients in addition to the meat. So for example, some contain crackers or breadcrumbs, ketchup or tomato sauce, onions, and eggs. And store-bought combination foods can only be credited to the CCFP meal pattern when the amount of each component is known. And the only way to know that what these amounts are is what the amounts in store-bought foods are is from the CN label or the product formulation statement. So now we're going to talk about processed meats, which are a bit different than combination foods. So these include items such as hot dogs, pepperoni, and sausage. So processed meats may seem like they're 100% meat, but they may contain binders and extenders, byproducts, cereals, or fillers. And examples of these are listed in the guide and shown on the slide. So to determine if a meat item is 100% meat, you must look at the product's ingredients. And if one or more of the items in this blue box is an ingredient, then you must obtain a CN label or product formulation statement to credit the item and to tell you how much must be served to meet the meal pattern requirements. So one such item on this list that causes a lot of confusion is pre-made frozen beef patties. So when you're purchasing pre-made frozen patties, only those that are labeled as a ground beef patty, hamburger patty, 100% beef patty, or pure beef patty are creditable without a CN label or product formulation statement. Any product that's labeled as beef patty are considered a processed food because they contain binders, extenders, or fillers that actually decrease the amount of meat and the amount that contributes to the meal pattern. So for example, these beef patties contain soy protein concentrate, which is a binder and extender. So to credit these products, you need a CN label or product formulation statement. So a CN label or product formulation statement provides information on how a food item contributes to the meal pattern. You must obtain one of these prior to preparing the item to ensure it credits to the CACFP. Then you use the CN label or PFS to determine how much to prepare and serve. So refer to the Crediting Store-Bought Combination Foods handout for information on how to use this documentation. But if a CN label or PFS cannot be obtained, then that item cannot be served as part of a meal. So we went into detail on how to use CN labels and PFS product formulation statements in the Product Labels Tuesday Talks webinar, so we won't go into detail today, but we do recommend that you watch this recorded Tuesday Talks webinar to learn more. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about grains. So for an item to be creditable as a grain, the first ingredient or second after water on the ingredients list must be a whole grain or flour, an enriched grain or flour, a bran or a germ. Or the grain item is enriched, meaning that the vitamins and minerals have been added to the item. And you know this because the vitamins and minerals are listed in the ingredient list. So the Creditable and Non-Creditable Foods Guide lists many common grain items. Some of these are single grain items such as brown rice, quinoa, and oatmeal, while others are foods that are creditable as a grain due to their primary ingredient being a whole or enriched grain or flour, a bran, or a germ. And these include items like breads, tortillas, bagels, waffles, pancakes, and pasta. So the guide also lists some less common creditable grains. For example, corn pone, polenta, and spoon bread are all foods that are made with cornmeal and can provide an alternate to serving cornbread. Another one is couscous, which is a pasta and it's creditable. But please note that not all couscous is whole grain or enriched. So you must check the label to make sure that the first ingredient is a whole or enriched grain. And popcorn isn't an uncommon grain, but it hasn't always been creditable on the CACFP. So we wanted to point out today that it is creditable and it's actually a whole grain option. So the revised grains chart on the left side includes some of the creditable grains that are listed in the Creditable Non-Creditable Foods Guide, and it also includes required serving sizes per age group. There's also a cereal types handout that's shown on the right that provides information on cereals that are categorized into 3 different types: flakes, rounds, and granola. And this also includes the amount to serve for each age group. So links to the grains chart and the cereal types handouts for both the child care and adult care components are in the Creditable and Non-Creditable Foods Guide and on this slide. So now we're going to talk about some non-creditable grains. So foods are not creditable as a grain when the first ingredient or second after water in the ingredients list is not a whole grain or flour, is not an enriched grain or flour or a bran or a germ, or if the food is not enriched with vitamins and minerals. So some organic foods fall into this category, as in the example on this slide. So you'll see that the first ingredient is organic wheat flour, but since it's not whole or enriched wheat and the product is not enriched with vitamins and minerals, these crackers are not creditable as a grain. Foods are also not creditable as a grain when sugar is the first ingredient. These popular muffins are an example where the first ingredient is sugar, therefore they are not creditable as a grain in the CACFP. So other non-creditable grain items include some pastas where the first ingredient is durum wheat or durum wheat semolina, which are not whole grain or enriched. And the food is also not enriched with vitamins and minerals. There are also many non-creditable brands of tortilla chips. And this is because the first ingredient is corn, not enriched corn or whole corn, and the product is not enriched with vitamins and minerals. You can even see with the multi-grain tortilla chips that while the product includes whole grains such as the whole brown rice flour or the whole buckwheat flour, the first ingredient is corn, which is not whole or enriched. So none of these products meet the requirement that the first ingredient or second after water is whole or enriched, and the product is not enriched with vitamins and minerals. Therefore, these products are not creditable as grains. And here are a few other non-creditable grains. Potato chips or sticks and veggie straws, chips or sticks, are not creditable as a grain because they're considered a processed snack type food. Potato foods, such as French fries and mashed potatoes, are many times thought of as a grain. However, they don't credit as a grain, they credit as a vegetable. And cereals that are above the CACFP sugar limits are also not creditable. So lastly, we're going to talk about grain-based desserts, which are not creditable in the CACFP. So many are listed in the grain-based dessert box in the Creditable Non-Creditable Foods Guide. A few examples are toaster pastries, cookies, including vanilla wafers, and granola, cereal, and Nutri-Grain bars. Also, caramel popcorn and kettle corn are considered grain-based desserts, even though regular popcorn is creditable, as we mentioned earlier. Even homemade grain-based desserts, which are made with less sugar or fat, and that might be whole grain, these are also not creditable. So how a food item is perceived plays a role in determining if it is a grain-based dessert. So before purchasing an item, consider whether the food looks like a grain-based dessert. For example, if the item is shaped like a cookie or like a granola bar or cereal bar, then choose another option. Some grain-based desserts may be labeled with a different name too, such as a breakfast flat or a square instead of a granola bar, or sometimes they say breakfast round instead of a cookie. However, they're still considered a grain-based dessert and must not be served. So for more information, check out the handout, Is it a grain-based dessert? So our final thoughts today are to remind you about the USDA Accrediting Handbook for the CACFP. Many of the foods on the Creditable and Non-Creditable Foods Guide are also listed in this handbook. However, the Accrediting Handbook includes more information on why certain items are or are not creditable.
And if you think of questions after today that you didn't get to submit to us, please email your assigned consultant. You can find your assigned consultant at the link on this slide that you should have access to in your handout. And if you're a family daycare home provider, please reach out to your home sponsor with any questions. And please don't forget about past Tuesday Talks that are recorded and available on the Tuesday Talks website. Also, we have available the handout with speaker notes,